Welcome everyone to CIC, and I know, as I've mentioned before, in summertime we have obviously we have fewer people, but that doesn't matter a whole lot, because if you remember the passage in the Bible where Jesus says, you know, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I will be in their midst. So there's at least 2 or 3 of us, right? So which means that God is here with us, and His name is Emmanuel, God with us. So again, we welcome each and every one of you. Some of you, it may be your first time here, and especially want to welcome you to our church family. A couple of announcements. I did mention something last week about the Noah's Ark. Anybody had a chance to check out Noah's Ark? Not yet? Okay, I know you have. Okay, so if you haven't had the opportunity, again, it's at Expo Park, not too far from here. And I think the exhibition goes on until end of August, something like that. So please check it out, because you don't want to miss this opportunity. So Expo Park, Noah's Ark. In Korean, 노아의 방주. Got it, right? Okay, yay. Following the service at CIC today, most of you know that there's a barley bread church, 보리떡교회, which is Korean-speaking service. But we have special guests today. So if you want to linger around, get some coffee, you have to wait about 30 minutes or so, right? Because the service starts shortly after 11. But we have the guests that we have today. I mean, we have a speaker, but the speaker won't be long. But we have special musicians. And it's like this. We've invited the same group at Riverside Church, but it was so meaningful that we wanted them back here for Barley Bread Church. So if you can make it, we have musicians, singers who are visually impaired. So it's a really neat opportunity for you to meet them, and they're going to basically be leading our worship today at 11:15. So you can go home, come back if you'd like, or you can hang around a little bit, so that'd be good. And one more announcement is that this week, or this Sunday, is the last Sunday that nursery upstairs is provided by Joe O's family, because they go on a break for the month of July. I think at least like a month. So I think when TCIS starts back, I believe first week of August, that's when we'll have nursery children's church back. So if you can keep that in mind, again, this week is the last Sunday for nursery with Joe upstairs, but starting next week, they go on break. So that'd be great if you could remember that. And I have one last. This Sunday is the last Sunday for the Balancing Act series. So if you've been with me the previous 3 Sundays, you've seen a few videos of unicyclists, right? This is going to be the last one. It's short, but let's watch this together.
Nick for the weed, but they're giving me a caution. And I ain't living anywhere, I'm an orphan. Bum bum da 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 bum bum da da bum bum da 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 bum bum da da bum bum da 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 bum bum da da bum bum da 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 bum bum da. The fame won't destroy the energy. Nobody can't destroy the melody. The weak won't replace my legacy. No strong will, they're born to better me. The game can turn a good friend into an enemy. Don't get ahead of yourself, you're not ahead of me. You are not my chum, no pedigree, but you got into my path quite cleverly. A hater doesn't deter me. My work rate, now I'm returning the favor, cause it's the first thing. So pay back, say you all deserve it. Must get a little vibe sipping on the bourbon. I follow good opinions when I'm learning. People saying I'm a winner and I've heard them. KW's get a clump like Sherman. Bum bum da 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 bum bum da da bum bum da 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 bum bum da da bum bum da 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 bum bum da da bum bum da 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 bum bum da da bum bum da 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 bum bum da da bum bum da 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 bum bum da da bum bum da 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 bum bum da da bum bum da 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 bum bum da da bum bum da 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 bum bum da da bum bum da 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 bum bum da da bum bum da 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 bum bum da da bum bum da 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 bum bum da da bum bum da 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 bum bum da da bum bum da 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 bum bum da da.
All right, looks fun, right? Exciting? Well, this week in particular, I asked our Pastor Myung-an, to look up a video with a lot of people falling or failures, okay? So that's why this particular one, I mean, there's a bunch on YouTube that you can find on your own as well. But I mean, this Sunday in particular, I want to focus on the whole idea of falling or failures or making mistakes, because that's something that happens in our lives, whether we want it or not, right? But it's true in life as well. But I mean, these guys here that you just watched on the video, they're all pretty good. Because, I mean, although they make mistakes and they fall and they fail, but to be at that level, I say, I mean, as a unicyclist myself, those guys are crazy good. And I think you can break your ankles, break your wrists, break your neck, but and these guys are young, right? So maybe they heal much faster than old guys like me. Because, you know, if I fall like that, 뼈가 안 붙어요, you know? Like bones don't heal as quickly, but these guys are younger, so they kind of like 붙어 maybe, I don't know. But anyway, but it's crazy. And there are a lot of extreme sports. I'm going to show you another video in a little bit about alpine climbing. And I don't know if you know the term alpine climbing, but if you watch the video, we're going to watch a short trailer a little later. But it's crazy. So there's a lot of extreme sports out there, right? But whether it's extreme sports or not, there are a lot of things that require balancing skills, just like I've been talking about the previous 3 weeks. In life in general, relational world, financial world, in the working, in the marketplace, you know, everything requires some form of balancing. And we have to learn that. It's a skill. It doesn't just come automatically, right? And we'll read a passage in a little bit as well. But one thing that happens when you begin to ride the unicycle is that you fall a lot. I mean, if you learn the bicycle, for example, even, how many of you can ride the bicycle? Let's see some hands. All right. Most of you, right? Most of us can ride the bicycle. Did you fall or not fall? You fell, right? How many times did you fall when you were first learning how to ride the bike? How many? Can you count? 20? More like 200? Maybe? Right? I mean, you fall a lot because it requires balancing. Unicycle, same thing. You fall a lot. But then again, as you fall, or when you fall, it kind of teaches you a life lesson, doesn't it? It kind of like teaches, okay, next time I'm going to try this way maybe so that I don't fall again. And you try it again. You may fall again, but again, then that's another life lesson. Okay, let me try this method. Maybe that will work. You know, keep myself from falling. So there's life lessons to be learned when we fall because, you know, we fall a lot in life. I mean, who doesn't fall, right? I don't mean in the sense of falling while you're walking or something like that, but just from different types of life experiences or in the relational world, we often fall because life isn't always predictable. It doesn't always go the way we plan it, right, to go. It's not always like hunky-dory. Life just isn't that way. Maybe because it's a way of God humbling us so that we recognize that life cannot be done alone on our own strength, right? Not just in spiritual life, spiritual matters of life, but in all walks of life, that we need to rely and dependent on God for strength and wisdom, right? So I think that's why from time to time we have failures and we fall and we make mistakes so that we can learn from them and go on in life. Okay, I'm going to show you this trailer, but before I show you this trailer, how many of you have watched the movie called Alpinist? Alpinist, no? Okay. How many of you into like rock climbing? Anybody? No? Okay. Let's check this one out. It's about a minute long.
When I'm in the mountains, life is so incredibly simple.
Who impresses you right now?
This kid, Marc-Andre Leclerc. He's been doing all kinds of crazy alpine soloing. What I'm doing is on rock, and then I see Marc-Andre free soloing on ice and snow.
First time I heard about Mark, he's living in a snow cave on the parkway or something. He is pushing things that is pretty much unknown.
I'm Marc-Andre Leclerc. I'm a climber, generally speaking.
just different than anyone I'd ever met. I love him for that.
He belongs in a different era when it was like wild.
I can tell the Marc-Andre stories all day, but he doesn't even care if anybody ever knows what he's climbing.
It's more just to have a casual, fun adventure.
I just hope he's careful.
Anything can happen.
I mean, I know it's dangerous. I'm not like deluding myself that it's not dangerous to go soloing.
So why do it?
Solo alpinism, climbing big, technical mountains, is more than just a sport.
It's only for the very best climbers on their very best days.
It's the art of surviving in the most crazy situations.
Marc-Andre had some challenges as a kid. Climbing was like a form of freedom to be himself.
When you're in the mountains, it's like all of the superficialities of life just sort of evaporate.
Holy smokes!
Torre Ager.
You're going climbing.
Some people consider it the hardest peak in the Americas.
Is a razor's edge between genius and madness. That's a sharp, hard edge to ride.
Mark dropped off the radar.
A climber has gone missing.
If death was not a possibility, coming out would be nothing. Not an adventure and not an art.
How was it? Scary?
No, not particularly.
So just another day out.
A really good day out.
Day out.
A really good day out.
Okay, does this look fun? Nay? I'm not trying to encourage you to try this, okay? Solo climbing or anything like that, but it's a great movie. It's like a documentary, and so if you get a chance, I invite you to watch it sometime, because it makes you think about lots of things, and it looks pretty crazy, but there are people out there that do this sort of climbing, and I don't know if you know the terminology solo climbing. Solo doesn't mean necessarily you're climbing alone, although it does mean that, but it also means that you don't have any support structure, equipment that supports you in case of a fall. I don't know if you notice, but he's not connected to any ropes when he climbs like this. So if you fall, you're dead, basically, because it's so high, right? So that's solo climbing, and a lot of people do rock climbing, but this guy is doing more like ice climbing, and that's what alpinism is. So if you can check out the movie sometime, please do so. And again, this requires a lot of balancing act, whether we realize it or not, and so does life. I heard one unicyclist say on YouTube that if you're not falling, you're not learning. If you're not falling in life, you may not be growing, in a sense. Does that make sense, right? Like I mentioned maybe last week, a child, before he or she learns how to walk or run, on average, falls around 3,000 times, okay? So all of us, whether we remember that or not, we have to fall a couple thousand times at least before we learn how to walk and run. So you fall, but you learn from falling, you grow from falling. And that's the whole idea of this month's series, Balancing Act. And God teaches us how to balance our lives as we live through life, maybe 70 years, 80 years, 90 years, 100 years, whatever it may be. Every single day and every single moment requires some form of balancing. And God gives us that wisdom, right? Which is a great thing. So that's something that we have to remember, and that we can realize, we need to realize that we can learn from our mistakes and failures. We learn from our experience, because we don't usually get things right the first time, right? Unfortunately. I mean, if we could get things right the first time around, we'd be geniuses, right? I mean, it'd be a perfect world. But we don't live in a perfect world, and we're not perfect humanoids. So we have to learn by falling and through our mistakes, hopefully. You've heard the expression, live and learn, have you? Anyone? Yeah. And what does that mean? Yeah, you live, And throughout the course of your life and life experiences and your failures, hopefully you learn lessons from them. But did you know that there's another way of living? A biblical way of living? I mean, it's not easy, but it's the flip side of that. Live and learn. It's a proverbial side or proverb side of the Bible in the Old Testament, which basically teaches learn and live. But most of human experience, the way we learn, most of us in this room probably is through live and learn. We live through our mistakes. We learn from our mistakes, right? And then we learn later on, gradually, eventually. But the biblical way actually is you can learn first and then you can live. You can live. So it's a little different, but again, we don't always get it right. That would be the ideal way to do life, perhaps. Making fewer mistakes in life. The problem is that we are so proud, we think we get it. I can do this thing called life on my own without God's intervention and help. So we try to do life on our own, and again we fall. And that's when we so often, fall flat on our face. But if we can learn from that, it's okay. We often learn from our errors and mistakes. But it's also possible to learn from others' mistakes, isn't it? When we watch and observe how other people live and lead their lives, we can also learn not only from my mistakes, but from their mistakes. It could be like maybe our parents' mistakes, for example, right? You know what's good news though? Good news is that God embraces us in spite of our mistakes. So that's a good thing. Sometimes people don't accept us when we make mistakes or when we fall. They may not always be proud of us. They may reject us. They may not want to have any kind of relationship or association with us. But that's not the way, thankfully, that's not the way God sees life, and that's not the way God operates. So it's a great thing. I don't think, for example, my parents were not necessarily, they were great parents, still are, but I don't think they were perfect parents. I can remember one incident when I was thrown into a situation several times. For example, my dad is really good at interpreting, okay? Korean into English or English into Korean. It works really well for him. He's an experienced interpreter, I'd say. One time, we had this missionary visiting our church. So normally when that happens, an English-speaking missionary needs an interpreter, right? And this is way back when. There weren't many interpreters around, at least in the church that I grew up in. So my dad, when somebody like that, a foreign guest or a missionary comes to give a message or a testimony, my dad would be the one that would fill the gap so that people can understand what the dude is saying. But one time my dad was out of town and I was sitting in service with my mom, like you guys are sitting, right there. And the missionary came, my dad wasn't there. So who's to interpret for this guy, right? He can't just stand alone and just speak where no one else can understand what he's saying. So my mom sitting next to me nudges me like that. And she goes, you need to go up there and interpret because Dad's not around. Nobody can understand if you don't go up. And I was thinking inside, why isn't she going up? And why is she nudging me? She could probably do a lot better job than I could because why? I was only 11 years old at the time. 11. And I've never had interpreting experience. How can I do this, right? I don't want to make mistakes. I don't want to fail, right? I don't want to embarrass myself in front of all this church people, So I didn't want to do it. But she kept nudging me. 요한아, 네가 뭐 안 하면 누가 해, If you don't go up, who's going to do it? So I was pressured, and I had to go up. And I you know what? When I was interpreting, I don't even remember what I was saying. I probably made all kinds of mistakes. I don't even know if people understood what I said. So I was thrown into that situation, which I didn't enjoy very much. And then later on in life, I was thrown into other situations like that, not by my mom, but by my dad. frequently similar experiences when I didn't want to do something, when I didn't want to interpret, maybe when I didn't want to be on stage in front of people because I didn't want to embarrass myself. You get that, right? I mean, you can understand. But then that was sort of like a teaching moment or a mentoring moment for me as I had children, as we had children. What I mean by that is that I didn't want to force our children into a situation they were uncomfortable being in. I mean, in a sense, it was a good life lesson for me because being thrown into a situation that you're not comfortable with can teach you, can grow you. It can mature you in some sense. But if you're thrown into situations like that all the time, there's something that can happen to you. So I didn't want our kids to experience that. So I tried very carefully not to like throw them in, forcefully into situations that they were uncomfortable in. But anyway, so we learn. We learn from our mistakes. But we can also learn from the mistakes of our parents or our friends, our peers, our teachers, right? So that's something for us to remember. But even through our mistakes, God still accepts us and embraces us. He says, there's no shame in that. There's no shame in your mistakes insofar as you can learn and grow from them. The text that I want to share with you is John 4. And you know this passage, I think. John 4:15 through 18. And I'm going to be reading this from the Message version, okay? John 4, beginning in 15, in the Message version it says this. The woman said, "Sir, give me this water so I won't ever get thirsty. I won't ever have to come back to this well again." He said, "Go call your husband and then come back." "I have no husband," she said. So then Jesus, goes on and talks to her and stays with her and then listens to her life story a little more, hangs with her. And then this woman, obviously met Jesus for the first time and initially thought he was just a prophet, a teacher, right? But then realizes who he is, Son of God, and recognizes that he can do something in her life to bring change. Because she's tried as hard as she could all these years, but it just didn't work. But Jesus, instead of judging her, instead of condemning her, what does he do? He showed compassion. He had compassion on her and taught her and showed her another way, a different way of doing life. And that's what Jesus teaches us. That's what God teaches us. That's what the Holy Spirit teaches us, which is a different way of doing life so that we can learn from our previous mistakes and that we can learn to walk with Him. Locally, I don't know if you know this, but some of you may know, but there's a university called CIC, right? At CIC, actually, interestingly enough, I checked out this place with Pastor Sonny one time, but some of you may already know, but they have a Center for Ambitious Failure. In Korean, it's called 실패 연구소. It's inside CIC. It's a cool idea. I mean, it didn't start here. It started actually at another college in the U.S. So actually, they have a Center for Ambitious Failure. I mean, is that title awesome? It's not just Center for Failures, but it's a Center for Ambitious Failures. It's saying basically, essentially, we invite your failures. No, we even want to go beyond that and we want to celebrate your failures. Because failures are okay and we can grow and learn. Not only in the science world, not only in the academic world, but not only in the business world, but in life in general, we can learn from our mistakes. So they have this place called 실패 연구소. I wish we had that in our churches. I think maybe we should start something like that, an organization like that in our churches, teaching, maybe those seminarians or people that want to go into ministry, that it's okay to fail. Fail from giving your messages or public speaking or helping people, serving people. Because through failures, we can grow as individuals, but collectively as a body as well. So I love that idea that CIC has. You can check it out sometime. And they even have exhibitions of how students, whether they're doing whatever they're learning from school, sort of like demonstrating, showing people through pictures and videos and stories how they have failed. I mean, why would you want to do that? So that others can learn and that they don't have to make the same type of mistake. It's a great ideal, isn't it? But what would be a failure story for you? If I may pause right now, and if I were to ask you a question, if I may ask you to share your story of a failure, I mean, you could think of some stories, right? Whether it's about child rearing, whether it's about your academic life, or maybe in your relational world. I mean, think about that. What might be a story, a failure story, 실패 story, that you can actually share with somebody? Maybe with a family member, maybe with a friend, maybe with somebody in this church, a small group member. Think about that. And why not share them, right? Because I think as we share them, it offers an opportunity for us to grow, but it offers an opportunity for others around us to reflect and grow as well. More importantly, I want to ask you this question as well. What have you learned from others, failures or their failure stories? When was the last time you've listened to someone's failure story? Because sometimes it's important to agonize alongside of them, saying, I hurt with you. I hear you. I feel your pain. And yet, I want to walk with you. I want to be your friend in your hardship, to be passionately present with somebody. It's so important, isn't it? In a way, we can actually cheer on each other's journey to overcome failures. And I feel like this is what Jesus did. Wouldn't you agree that this is exactly what Jesus did? Not only in the passage that we just read in John chapter 4 with this one woman, but he did this. He demonstrated this throughout the New Testament. He would meet and mix with people, mingle with people who failed morally and ethically, right? He would meet with a woman who failed miserably in her marriage life or in her marriages, right? Which is just reflected in this passage that we read in John chapter 4, our text today. Not only that, does he stop there, but he would meet with a dishonest and disregarded tax collector. You know the story, right? He would meet and eat with sinners and partygoers. He would meet with women who were sexual slaves of the day. He would meet with followers of his own that walked away from him, causing so much pain and heartache. His own followers departed from him, left him. Literally, they ran away from him because they were scared for life. In the end, they all probably feared one thing: that they would be condemned or rebuked or judged by Jesus. But he doesn't do that. He just rather teaches them and lends a helping hand, raises them up, and says, that can be a lesson learned for you. It can be a lesson to draw you closer to me. That's what he says. Jesus forgives and restores those broken relationships. And the same is true for us, isn't it? He doesn't abandon us for our spiritual or moral failures. Rather, he's in the business of restoration, and he's in the business of renewal. Yes, even today. He doesn't stop that work of renewal and restoration, which is a great thing. Has that been your experience? I want to ask. Would you like for it to be your experience? If so, it can be totally yours, because Jesus says he's on your side and you matter to him. Every single one of us matter to God. We matter to Jesus. Again, we learn and grow from our failures. And God accepts us in spite of our failures. So, I want to invite you and I want to challenge you. If you can, as often as you can, to as many people as you can, share your failure stories or experiences. Because we all fail. We're not alone. With as many people as you can, share them. Not to boast about them, not to brag about our failures. Of course, that's not the design, or that's not our purpose or intent, right? But to encourage and to heal. Because some people want to hear about our failure stories and how we've overcome them or how we are in the process of overcoming them. Obviously, we all need each other, right? And that's why we call ourselves a church. Called out ones is what it means in the New Testament. We're called out by God, not by ourselves, right? But collectively. That's why we need each other. To know and be known, to serve and be served, to celebrate and be celebrated. That's the church. We need each other because that's how God wired us up. And relationships can grow when we share our weaknesses and failures. But beyond that, when we acknowledge those failures, we are also acknowledging our need for God, and we can be more dependent on Him and His grace. I asked one of our girls, our daughters, yesterday. I said, hey, can you share one of your failure stories? And she was more than willing to. She basically wants to be a vet. But she just finished her 3rd year in college, okay? And one of the classes that's required and that you have to do pretty well in is chemistry. So she was telling me this story. She said she flunked her chemistry class twice. So now she's a little concerned, a little worried. She's not sure if she can make it, although she's going to try to take this chemistry class once again. But she's not sure if this thing or idea of pursuing, working with, majoring in animal science and becoming a vet is really a thing for her that's suitable. All these years she thought, and she was sharing this story with me yesterday just because I simply asked her that question about a failure story. She said, all this time, all these years, I love animals and I wanted to work with animals. But you know what she said last night? For the first time, she told me it was an opportunity, failing her 2 classes or chemistry class twice. It's an opportunity for her to stop and reflect whether that her course of life that she thought was designed for her was God's purpose for her or not. It's the first time she stopped to think about her major, think about her direction in life through her failure. And she can overcome it, obviously. She can take the course again, and she can maybe go to vet school if that's God's design, but at least she's able to stop right now, right here, and reflect. Is this the course that God has designed for my life and direction? And then I asked somebody else. His name is Joe. Can you share your failure story, Joe? And he also volunteered to share his story. He said when he was in grade school, elementary school, he had a really close friend that he connected with. And we all have close friends in elementary school or middle school or high school, right? That you can think about when you were growing up or maybe in school. And so Joe went on to say, we were so well connected, we were so close. But something went south. Something turned sour. They kind of broke off that relationship, that closeness, that tie that they had together. And you know what he went on to say? He said, neither of them were humble enough to recognize their weaknesses, maybe because they were young, they were elementary school, right? Maybe 3rd grade, 4th grade. They were really tight, really close. But something upset the relationship. They were both disappointed. They didn't want to see each other again. They didn't want to have anything to do with each other again. They didn't want to talk to each other again. And you know what he said? They still, to this day, they haven't reached out to each other. And he said he regrets that. He regrets not reaching out. He regrets not saying, I'm sorry, first. He regrets showing up, in front of his friend and saying, let's amend. Let's start over. Let's do this again. Let's try it again. So that was Joe's story of a lesson learned from his failure or mistakes. And we all have those stories, don't we? But it's important that we process them and recognize them, and through it all, that we ask and invite God's presence so that we can learn through those mistakes. Let me ask you again. I know I'm repeating myself, but what is your failure story? What can you think of? And what have you learned from the experience, and how are you growing from it? Are you sharing that story with someone else? Maybe start by sharing it with God. He's all ears. Believe it or not, He wants to be a part of our lives, including our highs and lows. Each and every moment of our lives, He wants to be a part of that. Really. He really does. So I hope you can remember that this week. And if you ever fail this week, if you make a mistake, I hope it gives you an opportunity to stop and reflect. And may it serve as an opportunity to draw you closer to God. We'll pray together, and then I'm going to invite Taejon back up, and we're going to sing our last song, and then we'll close in prayer. And if you can, join us for the next service at Barley Bread. Please stick around, okay? Let's pray together. Now, as we pray, if you could just it may not be easy, but if you could think of a failure story in your life, maybe a moment you've disappointed somebody, maybe a moment when you've disappointed God, maybe a moment when you've disappointed yourself. Can you think of that moment or experience? But more importantly, what have you learned through it? What does God want to teach us through our mistakes? So if you can just silently go to God for a moment right now as we all pray. God, help me to recognize my failures, my shortcomings, my mistakes, but more importantly, may those events help me to draw closer to you, Lord. Not give up on life, not give up on you, not give up on relationships, but may those experiences help me to draw closer to you and closer to other people and closer to myself. So I invite you to pray like that for the next few minutes.